All right. Awesome. So, Rao, thanks for joining me today.
Sure.
This is podcast number 2. I don't really know if this is going to be a podcast or a show, but essentially, thank you for joining me. For those who don't know you, can you just give us kind of a brief introduction?
Sure. My name is Rao Konidena, and I'm an independent consultant. I live right here in Roseville, Minnesota. I've been independently consulting for the past 6 years. Prior to that, I was working at a grid operator called Midcontinent, independent system operator. Most of you know MISO for 15 years. Before that, I was a consultant as well. So all in all, I think probably around 25-ish experience.
So a little bit of time.
Little bit.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, I really do appreciate you coming on. Kind of as I was mentioning as we came up the stairs, my goal with this whole podcast, essentially we're having a lot of people reach out who now see that we've been working in the sustainability sector and a little bit in conservation. And they're just like, hey, I am XYZ electrical engineer, or I am XYZ physics, computer science, biologist, so on and so forth. And they're trying to figure out ways in order to break into the environmental sector to find meaningful careers, as well as work that pays well so that you can feed your family. And what I found is that when I was making the transition, it was like, oh, I could become a park ranger or I could become a vet. And I didn't really recognize all the different career opportunities that were out there. So by having folks like yourself on, our goal is to help educate kind of the general public on all the different career opportunities and work that's out there so that you don't feel so pigeonholed to just become a park ranger or just become a veterinarian. And I think you actually have a really unique story, which I think a lot of people will really like.
I hope it's unique, but I find it boring.
well, looking back, you probably do. But, at our time together with Vidsia, you've definitely said a couple things. Like I remember at Gateway, we were talking to Ingrid,
yes.
That one lawyer, and you got talking a little bit about your career journey. I was like, oh, I need to talk to you more. So,
sure.
Yeah. So I know you started in India, correct?
Correct.
And you studied
electrical engineering.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your undergrad experience.
So my undergraduate experience, I went from living in Hyderabad to studying in Bangalore, which is both are technically software capitals. There are a lot of software engineers from that part of the India. And I went to school to study something called electrical and electronics engineering, really. So it's a EEE degree that we used to call it. And it really enabled me to broaden my horizon around what electrical systems are like. Because when I was, growing up, I did tinker around with my share of radios and switches and stuff, and I distinctly remember blowing out a fuse in one of the apartments that we were living in and stuff like that. So I was fascinated by this risk of electric shock, to be honest with you, and so that led me to electrical and electronics engineering degree. And in that degree program, obviously you have laboratories, and in the laboratory one of the experiments is basically trying to mimic how to start a generator, a motor essentially. So you get, at least somebody like me got a kick out of starting the motor after completing the circuit, and seeing the light bulb glow. So that's really what fascinated me. At the same time, it also helped me crystallize what I like and what I don't like. For example, I found out that I don't like programming. I'm not a computer nerd, if you will. I also found out it is very tough to keep my finger on something called microelectronics. That didn't really appeal to me. What appealed to me was this power systems, this entire universe of major power system grid, if you will, and how a substation transmits power, how a generator transmits power through a transmission line and stuff like that. So that entire system fascinated me. And so that's where I started my journey, so to speak, like thinking around, oh, that's what I like. I like the entire system, not just focus on a small microelectronic piece, not put my hand on something else that I don't understand quite well. So power systems journey started there, if you will. And also, even though I said I don't like software, I understood that there are softwares that are designed to model power systems, and I don't need to learn the programming of it. I can learn how to apply it. That's what interests me, and that's where I spent a lot of time. And thankfully, that's how I got my initial job in US, by modeling power systems.
Gotcha. I want to say that you started in consulting right out of college. Was that correct? Or is that?
I did.
Okay.
So in Bangalore, my initial job, my first job actually, was in the manufacturing
Okay.
industry on the shop floor, literally, with working with workers on diesel generator sets. I found out quickly that that's not my cup of tea, because it's very hard to motivate those employees. And I was coming in fresh out of school. I did not know anything how to motivate employees at the time. So I said, this shop floor, this environment, even though it is good, it's not really me, because I need to learn more on power systems. So that's how I came to US to study abroad, if you will, and pursue my master's in electrical engineering.
Gotcha. So did you know when you went into that job right out of college that it was not a forever job? Or was it something that you found out as you started the job?
To be honest with you, I thought I would be in the job for 10, 15 years. I would become a director or promoted. I'll marry, have kids, and all that kind of stuff. But certain events propelled me to seek employment elsewhere and to study abroad. One of which is my health. At the time, I was away from family, obviously, living in another town, not Bangalore. It was called Hubli, near this shop floor. And as a result, I had a couple of bad health things happen to me. As a result, I was not really into the job either. And so I knew that I was not being productive, and I knew I needed to do something else. So, and also a chance conversation with a senior in my college triggered the thought. At that time in college, when I didn't have the idea that I'm going to come to US, I'm going to work, is what I was thinking. The senior asked me, well, why don't you come to US? It's very easy. Why are you keeping your sights lower, is what he said. That stuck with me, kind of. And so when I was going through this phase of health and stuff, when I was working, I was like, wow, maybe I should give it a try. So I basically wrote the graduate record examinations, GRE, TOEFL and such, literally sat on the ground to study from those textbooks for hours together, took so many practice tests that I could even take those practice tests in my sleep. And it really motivated me to get outside that environment, because I knew I am capable of doing something, but not this thing. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, you basically took the bull by the horns and ran with it.
Kind of, yeah.
Which is very admirable. I've taken the GRE. I didn't do very good on the GRE, but I took the GRE once when I was thinking about going back and getting my master's kind of during COVID, which different side tangent. So when you tried to, or when you were in the process of transitioning from India to the US for work, what were all the hurdles or things that you needed to acquire in order to come over here for work?
Definitely the first thing that I realized even in my grad school that applies to work is raise your hand and ask questions. Here we kind of assume if somebody doesn't ask questions that they understand it. That's not the case. You have to ask questions, you have to involve yourself, and you shouldn't be shy of asking questions if you don't understand something. That was not the case when I was growing up in India, when I was going through college. In fact, it was frowned upon if you asked questions in my class in college.
Really?
So, well, you don't ask questions to the teacher or to the professor unless you know them personally or something like that, or they would like for you to ask a question. But here it's obviously different. You have to ask questions. You have to make sure you convey your interest on a certain topic by asking questions and then following up. You also have to write very well. That lesson I had learned only recently. I knew that I had to write, but I kind of kept it away for so long. Now in consulting, I have to now write not only blogs, obviously, as you know, but also scope of work and other stuff. And I actually read a lot too. And that really helps me. Writing actually helps my reading, because now I'm focused more on what I'm reading. So how did this guy make a case in this op-ed for this particular thing is something that I really interested in.
Interesting. Okay.
So reading and writing and obviously communicating, talking.
Well, where do you get most of your information then? Is there certain blog posts that you go to, certain book catalogs?
I wish there are books for a lot of information. Unfortunately, a lot of policy stuff that I'm involved in is not in the books, is not written. It's actually made as we go along, if you will. And a lot of stuff that I'm involved in at the federal policy level, you have to read all these 1,300-page rule-making procedures and understand where did the federal regulator come from, who convinced the federal regulator, what were their opinions, and which part of these comments did the regulator agree and disagree, why did they agree, why did they disagree, because that becomes the backdrop for some of my clients to take a position on, oh, there is a provision here that one of these commissioners disagreed with, and we could talk about that and make the case for our improvement that we want in a marketplace, stuff like that. So a lot of reading that I do has to do with federal regulations, blog posts that contain information on federal regulations, some podcasts for sure, but I am still not used to listening as much as reading and writing. So I'm still getting into that habit of doing something, listening while doing something else, for example. So I'm still not into the habit of it.
Yeah, well, so one of the disadvantages of video and audio is it's really easy to consume, but therefore, because it's easy to consume, it's not as easy to digest. Like, you just don't retain as much of it.
Sure.
So, although this is great, I'm sure that people will walk away and be like, oh, so he came from India. What else did they talk about? But
well, it's actually helpful when you're reading something. If someone else already talked about it to you, and then you kind of condition to, oh, I should look into this comment because they said something like this happened here. And so it is helpful. I understand all these mediums, but I'm just saying from a listening to podcast perspective, it's still a bit new to me.
Yeah. And it's kind of a newer medium. So like more of it's coming out nowadays, but I can understand that. So you quite literally are reading like meeting minutes from congressional hearings. That's one of the readings that you do, is like the hundreds of pages of minutes?
Well, what I meant to say was hundreds of pages of regulations.
Okay.
So not exactly the meeting minutes per se. So in this country, there is a federal commission associated with energy called FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And they look after transmission lines, natural gas, and stuff. Obviously, states have their own authority around generating units and stuff. But when this federal agency puts out rules, they have to go through a process. Their process basically entails proposing the rules first. That takes 18 months, and allowing stakeholders to comment on those rules, and then taking those comments and issuing a final order. And then stakeholders have time to comment on those, and then if some don't like that, they can go to the same agency and ask for a rehearing, just like in a court, and then they can deny it or approve that particular nuanced object or stuff. And then if that doesn't even work, then the interested party can go to federal DC Circuit Court of Appeals, and if that doesn't work, then they can go to the Supreme Court. Jeez. So policies in this nation go through this process, and obviously not everything is following the same process, if you will. But I'm reading these federal regulations that the regulators have taken into comments and issued an order, and it is very nuanced, because some of the one of the rules that I'm reading right now actually is around transmission planning in this country, how transmission projects are going to benefit customers at large. And the controversy around here is some of the states, including some utilities, are complaining that this rule is not going to be beneficial to those states, and it involves socializing the cost of transmission lines. So even a simple topic like we need a transmission line to ship or deliver renewable energy from a faraway place to load center is a bit political today, as you can imagine.
Well, I can understand that. Like back in the days when I was designing and selling for like agricultural systems, residential and agricultural solar arrays, one of the big things that I did is we'd pull out the energy bill and I'd be like, look, you're paying $50 a month just for transmission costs.
Right.
So you're saying that $50 for transmission costs, the big bill or the policy that they're working on is they're trying to, all the solar gardens, big industrial systems, so on and so forth, they're trying to distribute that transmission cost, so that $50 is going to go up to $55 for every customer.
Right.
Gotcha.
Exactly. So But these rules don't come out with that level of detail that you need, that you and I need. For example, it doesn't tell you, is your bill going to go up by $5 or is your bill going to go up by $10?
Do you think that they do that to be purposely vague, or they just really don't know?
So that's where the policy comes into play, that this is a federal policy. Obviously, not all transmission lines have to go through this policy of costs, how they're associated, because some of the transmission lines can be within the state.
Yep.
And that means the state has a say in how those costs are allocated. However, in states that are within a market, then it's a federal policy. So there is I call it a healthy tension, if you will, between the federal and state policy. So to answer your question, we won't know until the final tally is done which transmission projects go in, and then how much of those costs you end up paying. For example, in Minnesota, all Excel customers would likely pay Excel's transmission. But if it's a GRE's transmission, the Great River Energy's transmission, would Excel's customers pay for it? It depends. And that answer, it depends, is what MISO, my previous employer, does cost calculations on.
Okay. So let's rewind a little bit, because obviously you know a lot about policy because you work in policy now. But when you went to your graduate degree, you know, you were going for your triple E, electrical engineering plus electronics, correct?
Right.
Did you know going into that graduate program that you wanted to make the transition into policy, or was it still, hey, I kind of want to be a tinkerer, more of an engineering side?
I definitely did not know that I would end up here when I was going through my master's program. It was in it was in energy systems.
Okay.
I went to University of Texas at Arlington, and they had a energy systems research center. So that's where I did my master's. But at that time, I was still focused on this vision that I was chasing, which was around modeling power systems. So modeling power systems was really something interesting, and thankfully I found an on-campus job that allowed me to model power systems. Nice. I was running a software called Power World at the time, which is really visualization of power systems. So that really is how I got my foray into modeling power systems. And then I understood, for example, these models take a couple of hours to run. These models need a lot of upkeep. You have to build the model, which means it takes some time to verify the generators in the model and stuff like that. So I have run a lot of load flow analysis, power flow analysis initially in my career, but at the same time, I did not understand quite where that would land, if you will, in a policy setting, because it was a bit vague for me. In fact, one of the reasons I'm effective, perhaps as a consultant, is I have that engineering background. I know what these models can do and cannot do. So it helps me in my current policy arena that I know some of the intricacies involved in modeling.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know you guys mentioned that in the foreword of your book, which I'll be honest, I didn't get all the way through, but I tried. I just ran out of time. But you guys very much said that it was very important you don't have to be an electrical engineer, but it is important to at least understand the electrical engineering concepts in order to be able to have thoughtful discussions around policy and regulations and things like that.
That's right. That was our intent behind writing that book. Thankfully, it looks like at least you understood that by reading however many chapters or pages that you were able to, because we felt that there is a need in this industry, that there are textbooks that go into detail on electrical engineering concepts, Kirchhoff's law, so on and so forth. However, there are also textbooks that go into detail on policy, and there are textbooks that go into detail on operations. I really like something called an automatic generation control, AGC concept, that is in the generation operations book, if you will. I still remember that. So we wanted to bring together all these three major areas into one single textbook, so that policymakers and others who are interested in this policy and who want to make a difference can quickly grab these concepts and run with it. We want to give them that foundation without having to go search for these simple concepts in so many different places.
Which makes sense. Has a lot of universities, or has any universities picked up the book and kind of ran with it for a class yet?
Not yet. I've been trying to get that after spending enough billable hours with consulting work. I'm still, if time allows, trying to do that. But obviously, there are a lot of textbooks in this industry, and there are a lot of professors who are actually consultants, and there are professors who have to write papers in their quest towards tenureship and such. So it's not completely done yet, but I'm still looking forward to that.
Yeah, in time. But in time. So there's enough people in the young professionals group now that we have a lot of policy people, which I guess makes sense because MISO does a lot of policy, but there's a lot of policy people that are coming through the door now that I'm just like, oh, interesting.
Right.
So,
Right.
So it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time. So after graduating, first off, do you feel like you would have been gifted or came across the opportunities to transition into modeling power systems if you didn't go to graduate school? Or could you have done that with just your undergrad, or do you feel like you needed your master's?
So that's a good question. I think the answer is I wouldn't have had the opportunities in modeling if not for the master's degree. Because I think if you have an undergraduate degree, because it's a very generic degree, even in India, it is still a bit generic compared to the undergraduate degrees here. Actually, undergraduate degrees here provide you more opportunities to do internships and stuff. And when I was at MISO, I had a lot of interns. I really liked the internship program. So what I'm trying to say here is the master's degree opened the door for doing modeling. And also, I think in general, obviously you need either work experience or a master's degree to be credible, if you will. And the master's degree that I'm talking about are, for me personally, helped me get my leg in the door in US, right? Because I did not know what FERC is. For example, when I was going through my college in Bangalore, I knew what a Central Electricity Authority is, which is equivalent of FERC, but not FERC. So FERC and all these nuances that we have in the United States, like, oh, there is an Eastern interconnection, there is a Western interconnection, and Texas has its own interconnection. Why doesn't Texas like to connect to the rest of the grid?
There's a lot
now, stuff like that you learn in grad school, and then you model that in grad school. So that foray only happened because of grad school, I think.
Gotcha. So it was a good decision, but it was a good decision because you knew what you wanted to get into.
Right.
That makes sense. So you graduated with your master's, right? And then did you go right to MISO, or did you have a short stint?
I did not go directly to MISO. I had a short stint. Again, I was working as a consultant on campus job, not on campus. Now I'm full time. I was on a work visa. I was on a work visa, working for a consulting company in Dallas, Texas. I really liked the company. I really liked how much I learned. In fact, I would even be bold and suggest most people who want to start in the industry should work for a consulting company.
Really?
Because when you work for a consulting company, you quickly learn how to communicate. You quickly learn how much work you have to do. As a result, you learn a lot of things. And then you also learn how to package it, how to market it. And it's the entire enchilada, if you will, right? Because you have to really take care of yourself. And if it is a small company, if it's a small consulting company, you have to do everything. In fact, one of the jobs that I did as a consultant, for example, is taking all the files that we output from these models and then burn a CD and then send the CD as a package, right? It's so simple. And then we used to even send the maps that we downloaded from FERC. Transmission maps. At the time it was allowed, and then send them to the client and stuff like that. So you learn ownership. You learn ownership of your task. And also I learned in that first job that if the product leaves your desk, then somebody else has it. But so you have to make sure that there are no defects. So this is my way of looking back on my first job, which was in the quality assurance on the shop floor, making sure I don't have any defects in my work product. So that really helped me my initial consulting job because it piqued my interest in doing a lot of stuff. And also as a consultant, you get to work on different projects, not on one area alone. You get to work across the country and understand the client needs, how some of them are similar, how some of them are different, and then model it.
So if you loved consulting so much, because obviously that's what you do now, why did you make the transition from that first job, which is consulting, to working for MISO?
again, circumstances wise, because consulting, as you can imagine, is driven by client needs. If there are no client needs, then you have to find something else to do. And that's what's the position we were in at the time because of Enron crisis. Enron crisis happened in 2000 because of some traders doing stuff that's not tradable or whatever. And as a result, the market took a while to catch up to that. And so suddenly the independent power producers market in Houston and all these studies that we were doing, which is basically what we call now the generator interconnection studies. When renewable projects seek to interconnect to the transmission system, it's called an interconnection study. So that's where I cut my teeth on these interconnection studies. And that's market dried up. And so that's why I had to find a job, and I had opportunities to do something on trade floor in Boston, to work for a municipal agency in Orlando, work for a consulting company, a bigger one in Sacramento, and then I picked MISO because MISO at the time in 2003 was little known, a small organization, and I was going to be based in Indiana.
Oh, well, and that's not where you ended up.
Right. Indiana was appealing to me from a small family perspective, cost of living wise, compared to living in Boston, for example.
Yeah.
So that's how I picked MISO.
That makes sense. That's one of the reasons we ended up deciding to stay in Minnesota. We were thinking Montana out of all places, but we're mountain people. So cost of living, it goes a huge play into it. Were you married at the time too?
I was.
Graduating.
Yeah, I was.
So,
and I had a baby on the way.
Yeah. So it changes your mind. It
Yes,
really does.
exactly.
You know, Aaron and I get married in 7 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. And
Congratulations.
I'm doing a podcast. Yeah. Thank you. But yeah, it changes your mind. You know, what was important to me 4 years ago is not what's important to me now, which is so crazy. Because everyone tells you that. At least when I was younger, they're like, oh, you'll get engaged and you'll get married and your career won't be as important. And I'm not saying that it's not important what I do, but it's not as important anymore, which is weird. So, okay, so you joined MISO. They moved you to Minnesota, and then you had a pretty long stint there. So
I did.
Tell me, because there's not everybody that's listening to this isn't going to know exactly what MISO and FERC and all these acronyms stand for. So just give me a little bit of background on the general function of what MISO does.
Sure. The best way to describe MISO is like an air traffic controller. Air traffic controller doesn't have any say in Southwest or Delta, but they have a job in ensuring that the planes take off and the planes land safely, reliability of the air transportation system. That's what MISO does for the electric transmission system. Make sure the generators have a way to deliver their energy over the transmission lines, and the load, like us, who are Excel's customers, for example, or GRE or Minnesota Power, receive power and keep the lights on. So these big companies like Excel, GRE, Minnesota Power are customers of MISO, are members of MISO. And if we want to be specific enough, we should call them transmission owning members of MISO. In other words, they own the transmission system that delivers this energy, but MISO manages it, is a grid manager, if you will. So it's an independent grid manager of this transmission system so that the electrons can freely flow from Excel's generation to Excel's load. And this function is important because, again, from FERC perspective, this transmission system previously used to be Excel's generation only can supply Excel's load using only Excel's transmission. Now, the transmission system is something called open access. Everybody can play in the market. It's available to everybody. And who manages the transmission system is MISO.
Gotcha. So, you know, and one of the cool things is when you were at MISO, from your previous experience in your graduate degree, the renewable energy boom kind of started.
It did.
And you ran with it. So,
It did. So renewable energy in MISO actually started in Buffalo Ridge area in Minnesota with all the wind that is coming online. That's when we were starting to do something called wind integration studies at MISO. This was in 05, 06 timeframe.
Okay.
And so that resulted in a lot of reliability calculations, modeling, and import-export limits, we call them, for those zones that can, how much can they import, how much can they export energy-wise. And my area at MISO was responsible for putting together these models, putting together these databases, making sure the information in it is accurate enough based on stakeholder input. And then someone else was going to run the models. So my area of expertise was in building these models, making sure there's a database up to good with all these input variables, and then let the other engineers run these models. So this happened in multiple iterations. The reason I stayed that long at MISO was not only being on a visa. Visa means you have to be at a employer for a couple of years at least, like 6 years, 3 years stint twice. But also I was leveraging the experience that I have as a consultant, which enabled me to quickly grow at MISO. So I had a couple of promotions, which really helped me along. But that also, I think, paved the way for further thinking in my current consulting role. We can get to it later. But initially, I was doing a lot of modeling, working with a lot of stakeholders, doing a lot of communication, since I now know the value of communication, and then networking. MISO really helped networking, because coming into contact with all the stakeholders, these organizations like Fresh Energy, Clean Grid Alliance in Minnesota, and so on and so forth, really helped me know the others' perspective on what MISO is doing. How is it impacting them? And as a result, I mentioned, for example, I liked interns and I was hiring a lot of interns. So you had to explain what MISO does to these interns and help answer their questions on a day-to-day basis during summer. So that really honed in some of these concepts for me.
Definitely. When you have to teach something, you end up retaining it much better. So
right.
I've learned that, because we've tried to bring on a production assistant or two, and then I try to explain like how to white balance a camera, which isn't an extremely complicated process. But once you have to teach somebody how to do it, you're like, oh, okay, well maybe I need to fine tune this, or maybe I need to
right.
Freshen up, come up with a tagline like it's the air traffic control of
right.
Electrical systems. So
exactly.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so MISO was going very well. Obviously, you were getting a variety of promotions, continuing to go up the corporate ladder, but your visa is kind of coming to an end. So why did you decide to go out on your own? Because now you work as an independent consultant.
Right. So why did I decide to do that? I think when I was at MISO, obviously on a work visa, and then became a green card permanent resident, and then finally had my citizenship, obviously I became a quote-unquote free agent. Yeah. Now finally I can choose the employer that I would like, for example. But I was not really looking forward or know that I had to come out independently. I was not sure about that. I did go through the same process, like interview for a couple of positions elsewhere and stuff like that. But the market is not as hot as it is today. Renewable developers were not calling, and the phone was not ringing, and they're giving so many offers every day. The offer changes and stuff like that. It's a different wild west market as I understand today, and maybe it is damping a bit now. But at that time, which is 2011, once I got my MBA, my executive MBA at Colton, I was not sure what I was going to do with my MBA, and still pursuing what I was doing at MISO that I liked. What really happened at that juncture is in 2013, I got a promotion as a senior manager. And yes, it was a good promotion, but it was not a happy move for me, because now suddenly I had to move from technical area to a non-technical area. I was really doing management, but that management was about process management, about compliance management, about project management, about financial management. So it was a divisional position that brought all these together for the efficiency for that particular division. The division I'm talking about is transmission planning, called transmission asset management. So now suddenly I had to take care of the entire divisions, in at least my group, to take care of divisions' compliance objectives, financial stuff and those things. I didn't really shine in that role. That was really what happened. Okay. So I was then thinking, how am I going to make a difference here again? What can I do? And what is true to my heart is demand response, meaning paying customers to reduce energy. That should be considered as well when you're building transmission. What is true to my heart is doing more rooftop solar, which is distributed energy resource in our jargon. What is true to me that I liked is doing more batteries installation and stuff. because why would you want to have a transmission line when a battery can discharge during peak demand and reduce the need for a new substation?
Yep.
And in fact, going back to my graduate degree at University of Texas at Arlington, I did cost accounting. In fact, my research thesis was on economic analysis of distributed generation and photovoltaic cells and fuel cells, actually. So taking all that back, and also I was connecting the dots here now at MISO at this juncture, which was, what did I really like at MISO so far? What I really liked at MISO was interacting with consultants, and I was doing stuff on demand response. I was doing stuff on distributed generation. I was, in fact, the project manager for a couple of iterations of it. I really liked that. So I took the the management job, and once I got an opportunity, became an individual contributor.
Okay.
I did not want this whole performance issues with people, supervisory role. I went to an individual contributor role. And suddenly I was so happy.
Huh.
I was so happy because I did not have to manage people.
Well, that takes a lot of self introspection to know that.
Absolutely.
Because it's hard to know. It's hard to know that. I've heard many stories. It's like, because I come from the world of sales and design, and a lot of the times what happens at these small companies is you have a rock star sales and design person, super great, they're bringing in a lot of revenue for the company, and you're like, oh, okay, well, this person should get a promotion, we should move them into a sales manager position.
Right.
But what does a sales manager do? Sales manager doesn't meet with anybody. All they do is make sure that numbers are hit and KPIs are hit. So that it's like you take somebody who's really good at one very specific skill and move them into a different skill, and then they become miserable.
Suddenly they are not happy.
And then it's you take an A player and make them a C player, and it doesn't make any sense. So, and that's hard because Lizzie and I have had the conversation multiple times here of like how we want to grow, because for video production / marketing agency, whatever we technically are, we're still figuring that out. Is we could grow a larger team, we could do bigger projects, and then we could manage those projects. But to be completely honest, I really like holding a camera. I really like doing the editing. I like doing the storytelling. I like being the director. Those stuffs are fun. But larger we get, the more people we manage, the less we get to do that. So it takes a lot of introspection and courage to make that jump from your company to do it independently. When you went out on your own, was it pretty hard to find your first few customers, or was it pretty easy from the connections that you had?
Both, to be honest with you. It was hard because I was not sure what I was going to do. I had a rough idea what I want to do. I want to do in the space that I mentioned, storage, batteries, and photovoltaics and stuff like that. But I was not sure who my clients would be. Okay. So this is where it was a bit easy, because I had thankfully run into people that I had networked over the years at the U of M or in my work at MISO, who needed a consultant to go back to MISO and advocate for their position. Gotcha. So that was my first foray into writing scope of work and ensuring I have a contract. And even though I quit MISO the Friday, Monday I had a consulting gig. So it helped. Nice. It would help. Exactly. So it helped. Some people suggested I should also tell you a bit before I jumped. I made the decision to jump 1 year before, but I was not able to convince my wife.
Oh, that's a barrier within itself. So
she said, look, fine, if you want to be happy, that's fine. But we got kids who are going to college pretty soon. Mm-hmm. So make sure you do your research before jumping. So I ended up taking notes, but I talked to 80 plus people.
Oh, good for you.
I talked to 80 plus people and I asked them, is this a good idea? Will you hire me? What can I do? Stuff like that. I remember most people said, yes, this is a good idea. Yes, this is a good time, except for 2. So that really helped me jump. And also, obviously, family, right? You want to make sure your mom in India is okay with it, because you're losing a good job.
Yeah.
Your in-laws on board with it. And most importantly, your family, your wife is behind it, because now I'm suddenly on her benefits.
Yeah, which is a whole different ballgame. I've told multiple people that if Aaron didn't have a full-time job, this would not be possible.
Exactly.
Because it takes time to ramp up. You do a lot of work for not a lot of pay at first in order to build credibility, showing that you can do it on your own.
Exactly. I did the same thing.
And it's hard. It's extremely, extremely hard. But once you get the ball rolling, it can get back to being easy and you enjoy your life more. But it takes some time.
It takes some time. And thankfully, my wife, Swapna, was behind me.
Oh, good.
Thankfully. and she's still behind me. And by the way, she gave me 3.5 years. Pilot, before my first daughter goes into college.
Yeah.
And if I didn't have reasonable income during the 3.5 years, the thing was, our agreement was, I will go back to a full-time job.
Yeah, we had the exact same thing. So last year was our first full year, and we had 3 months without pay. Well, we had revenue, but I couldn't pay myself, obviously. And we had sat down and had the conversation of, if I do not make consistent paychecks by December, we have to reevaluate. It didn't necessarily mean I had to go to work back to a full-time job, but it was reevaluate. Go get a part-time packaging job at Walmart, something, because this isn't going to work full-time. So having those stop gates with your spouse or significant other, I think it's
very essential.
Essential. If you don't have a good partner, it's impossible.
It is very essential. And even though COVID happened, and even though I did not have any consulting gig for 9 months of the COVID year first, 2020.
Yep.
Initially, I did not take pay myself for the first 18 months or so, and stuff like that. During COVID, the best thing that happened to me and my wife was we were walking. Yeah. We were walking every day. And during everyday walking, I was keeping her updated on what I was doing. And that really blossomed into continuing to she's like my board.
Yeah.
So I keep her informed on what is going on with clients, who is paying, who is not paying, who we are talking prospectively and stuff like that. So I'm really having her on board is really helping me, because it helps to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
Somebody professional who knows what you're going through, obviously, because she's also in a consulting organization.
Okay.
And it helps that I can voice over some of the things that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And then it helps me because, for example, you talk about how life is difficult as an independent consultant because you don't have the overhead or the benefit from that overhead of who is managing your accounting and stuff like that. So, for example, I'll give you this. I have a system in place for when a client pays. I have a system in place for how much cash flow I have and stuff like that.
Smart.
So that system really helped me find out that one client forgot to pay for a month.
Oh.
So that system really helped me saying, oh, you forgot this invoice is not paid. And they were like, oh, we forgot, sorry. Here you go. So my bottom line here is you need to have a system. Even though on your own, you need to have a system. I have a credit card for business. I don't do any personal stuff on it. I have a website and stuff. So I set up myself very well initially, and I'm continuing that because I have a setup.
Yeah, which is smart. Because
but having family behind you is absolutely important.
Huge. It's absolutely huge. It helps you keep sane.
Exactly.
There's been a lot of, I am brave enough to say there's been a lot of tears at our house on hard days.
Yes.
Because there's a quote from Elon Musk, and love him, hate him, doesn't really matter. The quote is still valid. It's like trying to start a business is literally eating grass and staring into the void. And it's like, there's so many days that are just, you don't know if it's going to work. You don't know if it's going to work.
You definitely don't know.
And you're going to work your butt off,
right.
But you just don't know. So how did you, so you had a bunch of networking people. Who are some of your clients? And I guess you don't have to be super transparent on that, but do you work like for large developers, or do you work for like small municipals? What's kind of the client base?
Good question. So right now, obviously things have changed a bit over the years. Right now, I have a lot of consumer advocates as my clients.
Interesting.
These are folks in states like Northeast, primarily Pennsylvania, Massachusetts and stuff, who need my expertise to translate what the utility is doing and the impact it is going to have on customers. Remember, you just asked or said something along the lines of, do we know the customer bill impact of a particular regulation? We don't. Mm-hmm. And as a result, what ends up happening is most of the time, utilities need X millions of dollars or X billions of dollars for transmission or generation, stuff like that. But consumer advocates are really advocating for the consumers in that particular state. In our Minnesota, it is Citizens Utility Board.
Gotcha.
So So in other states, there is an Office of Consumer Advocate. In some states, it's called Office of People's Counsel. In some, they are actually embedded within the Attorney General's office.
Okay.
So these consumer advocates need my skills about transmission, about MISO, about something called PJM, which is next to us, and stuff like that. So I'm really helping them these days. Yes, I'm helping some renewable developers here and there, but renewable developers are like us. They have very tight budget.
Yep.
And they are trying to make the project viable. And federal regulations and all these other stuff that is coming on, smart inverters, inverter-based resources, and all these new regulations is not helping them.
Yep.
So they have tight budgets, but consumer advocates also have tight budgets. At the same time, it is more productive work for me, right now at least, that I can help them write what is called testimony. I write written testimony on their behalf in front of state commissions like Illinois Commerce Commission, Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, North Carolina Utilities Commission, so on and so forth. And the part that I want to insist upon here is it is very rewarding for me. It is rewarding because these consumer advocates are fighting to keep the cost down of the consumers in their state, not only from cost perspective, but also from an economic justice perspective. For example, some of the communities who have these large power plants within their community are for ages, for decades together, breathing in these harmful emissions. That is why I'm really concerned about some of this. In fact, I have a family member who has some respiratory problems. So I'm really concerned about what is happening within regulations of Clean Air Act and stuff like that. And I firmly believe in renewables for that same reason, because I have a personal stake in it to ensure that our air is clean.
Yeah. That's one thing I really appreciate about you. That what I've come to realize the longer I've worked in renewable energy, specifically in the solar realm, is there's two types of people who kind of seem to get into solar. You know, there's the people who like genuinely environmentalists, which I'd like to think both me and you are. And then there's people who go in, they're like, oh, I can make a lot of money here. And
Right.
they could care less if they're selling roofs or solar or
Right.
cars, you know. So it's nice to hear that you do genuinely come from a place of caring, which is nice.
Yeah. So to answer your question, consumer advocates definitely work is rewarding. I do some renewable developer work, but of late, the work that I'm doing, which is also rewarding, but really kicks me in the behind, is this stuff around distributed resources. These small resources, like we can think about these programmable thermostats in your home, Google Nest thermostats, the rooftop solar, batteries, they can all be aggregated together.
I didn't know that you could integrate Nest with batteries and
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Interesting.
so you can integrate all of them together if allowed.
Okay.
Our state prohibits some of those regulations.
Why? That
It
seems
would
weird.
seem simple, but it would allow something called aggregators into our ecosystem. These are third-party aggregators that should be allowed to participate in states like Minnesota. They are already allowed in Illinois, by the way. Michigan lifted the ban on these aggregators. Missouri lifted the ban on these aggregators recently.
So I'm going to have you define aggregators to a little bit more of a extent.
Sure.
Because it sounds like alligators, and that's scary.
No,
to
these
me.
are aggregators,
So, yeah, okay.
energy aggregators. So what are aggregators? Aggregators basically think of them like the Walmart, if you will.
Okay.
They take all the retail customers and aggregate their load and bid them into the market.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. An example of this is you go to an HOA community.
Yep.
All the homes have rooftop solar.
Yep.
And then you have a community battery bank.
Correct.
And then the aggregator manages the battery bank and
Yep.
pitches it, manages it.
Exactly. That's
Okay.
exactly it. And they are the same. They will be on the same level as a Excel generator.
Interesting.
So Excel bids into the market, right?
So what's the argument on the flip side? Why are they trying to keep aggregators out?
So the flip side or the argument there is that aggregators are going to drive the costs. They're going
increase
to
it.
increase
Okay.
the costs. And aggregators are going to take the low-hanging fruit, like industrials and others, and leave low-income people.
Well, it is tough. So one of the companies that I haven't talked to a lot, but I do really appreciate their work, is Cooperative Energy Futures, because they
Yes.
do a lot of work to really make sure that solar isn't just for very affluent people who are trying to save on tax bills.
Exactly.
Like they're really doing it in order to try to save people on electrical costs and bring electrical costs
Right.
down, which I very much admire because don't get me wrong, renewable energy is great in all aspects because it lowers our carbon footprint, it makes the world healthier, and it makes us live longer.
Right.
So that's good, but it is really nice when you can distribute it so that the cost savings and the economic advantage of switching from this centralized grid system to a decentralized grid system can be shared. But it's tricky too because somebody has to eventually come up with the 30 grand cost or XYZ cost in order to install the system on the residential home.
Right.
And a lot of the times, at least from my experience, that money seems to be grants. And although that's a great system, it's hard to mass manufacture grants so that everybody can get this.
Yes.
So I don't really know too much about that business model, which is why I need to talk to Bruce more of how they do it so that they can allow these lower income or less fortunate folks to still get solar and seek the benefits.
Right. And so some of the work that I'm doing right now is not only with these aggregators on ensuring that these smaller systems can participate in a market, wholesale market, just like these large generators can, which is already allowed in states like Illinois and the Northeast and stuff, but not in Minnesota, for example. I'm also seeing, or one of the testimonies that I'm writing for these consumer advocates or environmental justice proponents in North Carolina is exactly on that concept. They have this concept, or this testimony is going to talk about this concept called shared solar.
Okay.
So you basically pay for rooftop solar in the same way like you pay for utility generation.
So like a PPA?
Not necessarily PPA. So utilities put together plants, right? Like a big solar plant. But you don't see a bill for the utility solar. You see an electric bill.
Yep. Yeah.
Because the generation component of your bill has the utility solar baked inside it.
Yep.
Similarly, the rooftop solar would be a component of a bill inside the bill that is already baked in. So you pay for those costs in your electric bill just like you're paying for the power today.
That makes sense.
Without having to go through this $30,000 thing and grants and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The installers will work with the customers, install solar, and they get paid by the utility based on this.
So is the system
bill.
still owned by the customer, or is the system
Still owned by the customer.
Interesting.
Yeah, because there are a lot of opportunities and models like these. In fact, you might have even heard the term bring your own battery.
I haven't actually.
Bring Your Own Battery is a program in Vermont from a utility called Green Mountain Power. So you have to literally bring your own battery to the utility, and they have a list of suppliers that they want you to contract with, like Tesla, LG Chems, Sonnen, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Some manufacturers. And as a result, what ends up happening is it's a $10,000 battery or something like that. You give them the contract to make sure that the battery is filled up before 4 p.m. or something like that, like a peak time. And then the utility gets to dispatch the battery.
Which is smart.
Exactly.
Yeah,
For 3 hours or 4 hours.
That.
Exactly. So what happens when the utility dispatches the battery during peak time? It negates the need for a new substation or a new generator.
Which saves hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And no longer you have this out of sight, out of mind thing going on, because you know the battery, you have the solar, you own them, and you, by the way, you are now enabling the grid, avoiding the blackout.
Yeah.
And getting paid for it.
It makes sense. So okay.
Why wouldn't we have this system? It really bothers me. Now, if we can maximize these distributed systems, if we can maximize this aggregation and still need a gas plant, still need a transmission, so be it. I'm not worried about that. We should pay for it. Whatever we need, we will pay for it. Consumers will. But why would we want to go ahead with those plans without maximizing these opportunities? That's really motivates me to wake up in the morning.
That makes sense.
Because it keeps our consumers' costs down.
Yeah. Well, and that's really the end of the goal, right? Like, for me, solar and batteries I'm not as educated on, which I should read some more on them. It's all about stability. At the end of the day, if you can keep the grid on and you can keep your costs down, that's usually where you get the maximum stability and where you get the best cost savings.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense to me. So why hasn't that Vermont bring your own battery system been massively adopted by other states then?
I am puzzled myself. I think a lot of legislators, a lot of policymakers are still not aware of some of these opportunities that exist. At the same time, utilities see this as a threat to their business.
Rightfully so.
Not everybody is like Green Mountain Power. Yeah. Okay, so let's be honest here.
Yep.
They see this as a threat because as soon as you enable customer generation, the flip side of it is revenue drop for the utility.
Yeah, exactly. And cash flow is king when you look at the value of a business. And if you're a publicly traded business, you have a legal obligation in order to maximize your revenue or your profits for your shareholders.
Yes.
So therefore, you do not want to lose customers. And solar inevitably turns a customer into now a supplier, which makes your operations more difficult. It makes sense why a lot of utilities do not like distributed generation because they lose customers. But if you can do partnership programs such as bring your own battery, or some other ones that you have mentioned in the past, where the utilities can still see some of the financial reward, then it totally makes sense.
That's right.
Interesting. Okay.
That's right. So we need those, and the technology that we are using today in our phone is the same technology that can aggregate these. So I don't believe that utilities need more systems to incorporate some of these technologies, because you can use the same technology that's in your phone to make sure that the utility knows if the customer is generating or is consuming. Mm-hmm. I don't think there is a big difference in the technology aspect. So I don't want technology to be a barrier. And all I'm suggesting also is not that we don't want utilities. I'm not saying that either. I'm saying we want utilities, we want to partner with the utilities, and to keep our costs down, the utilities should leverage some of our assets. We have to pay for it anyway.
Yeah.
Consumers are paying for their programmable thermostats. Consumers have EVs. Consumers have rooftop solar. Why not leverage that for the grid benefit? And get something in return.
That makes sense. Reduce your overhead rather than having to buy a $100,000 substation and say, hey, cool, 10 customers want to get batteries. Why not?
Exactly.
Let's make it happen.
Right.
I can see that. And I agree with that logic as well. So, okay, what projects are you currently kind of involved with now that are taking up a lot of your time?
So in addition to these testimonies that I mentioned in the States, I'm also involved in a couple of these market rules that are constantly changing, because obviously market operators have the reliability as their core function. So they feel threatened by a lot of renewables coming online because renewables don't dispatch 24 hours. They don't provide the same capability like a natural gas generator would, for example. So a lot of market operators, including MISO, are looking at ways to penalize some of these distributed systems. So I'm involved in making sure my clients can influence policy so that these distributed systems are on the same level playing field as generators. And this is not unique, by the way, because this is already set in stone through the federal rules that I'm following at FERC and so on. Mm-hmm. So we are talking about rules that have come into play a couple of years ago, as well as rules that have been in place 15 years ago. So both are coming into tandem here. And MISO and other ISOs are now changing how they are providing something called a capacity value.
Yeah, I've heard rumblings of that.
Correct.
So, okay.
So what ends up happening is our solar friends are going to see the capacity value for some of these plants, even if it is a 5 megawatt plant or a 50 megawatt plant or 100, the capacity value reduces to 5.
Wait, what?
5%, yes. I'm not
That's
joking.
huge.
Yes. So the changes that are at FERC for MISO on solar reduce the capacity value to 5% over the 5-10 years down the road.
That has to basically put that out of business then.
If they are depending upon the capacity value alone. Most solar developers don't depend on one particular value. They depend upon other revenue streams, including ancillary services, we call them, providing regulation and other services. Okay. And then energy prices. So this MISO that I talked about, in addition to putting together a transmission plan for the 15 states as an air traffic controller managing the operations with control room and stuff, also runs a market, an energy market. And that energy market is a day ahead market for tomorrow, and that energy market is in real time.
Okay. So it's kind of
different
like
markets.
It's kind of like the commodities market. Like
Absolutely.
iron could be a different price tomorrow.
Right.
So sell your iron today.
Right.
Okay.
So that market participants can hedge the risk.
Gotcha. So I would guess if somebody listens to this, and they are interested in starting to pursue a career in energy policy,
Right.
where would you recommend them getting started? Assuming that they are second year of college, still figuring out what they want to study. What would you suggest?
I would suggest definitely go down the path about internships.
Okay.
Try to get internships at good organizations that we have so many of them here in Minnesota alone, for example, like Clean Grid Alliance, Fresh Energy, Environmental Initiative, SEAM, Clean Energy Economy Minnesota. It is important to get down into the weeds because my pet peeve is to enable policy discussions, you need to really understand at least one topic well. Like if you want to pick on solar and then drill into solar capacity value. How is it determined? What MISO is doing? What are the utilities saying? What are the developers saying? Try to understand the model behind it. All that, dig deeper. So do these internships, read whatever you can on this capacity value topic, talk to people, make sure you even present to these audiences. Because when you present to diverse group in a lunch and learn session, for example, at your company or at these internship programs, you will learn it quickly.
Yeah.
You will learn pretty quickly what do you know and what you don't know. And people in general, we fear a lot of losing face, but people in general are very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. They keep you comfortable.
I've learned that too. So I've learned that the more...
They keep you comfortable. So they don't have to worry that they don't know something about it. Because I feel like some professionals might be like, I need to know on this topic very well before I speak on it. No, you don't have to know 100% of the topic. Even if you know 60-70%, that's okay. And admit that you don't know the 30%. It's okay.
Yeah, I think people appreciate it a lot more when you come out and say that you don't know something.
Right.
Because then it validates that the things that you are speaking on, you do know.
Yes.
Which I think helps a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correct, someone's out there, second year of college, maybe even graduated, who knows, but they really wanted to get into policy work. Your suggestion is internship, specifically dig really deep into one topic.
Yes.
Such as solar, wind, batteries, hydro, whatever.
Right.
And then from there, work on trying to do some presentations to validate your knowledge.
Exactly. So become that person, become that subject matter expert in that area.
Okay.
Then you will start to get people talking to you, coming to you with questions on the topic. Use that then to develop more networking stuff.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Okay. Note to self, become an expert at one thing. Okay. Perfect. Resources out there. So obviously you do a lot of reading. It sounds like you're also doing some podcasting, but say, okay, for example, let's just talk batteries. Okay. Because I actually think that education around batteries is somewhat lacking compared to solar nowadays and even to wind. So what resources would you suggest if somebody wanted to dig deep in battery education? Where would you suggest going?
I think there are still some good materials out there on this organization is called Clean Power.
Okay.
Association or something like that. It used to be Energy Storage Association. Most CI chapters are a good place to start because they will have somebody in the industry who has experience with storage. Otherwise, even typing in Energy Storage 101 is helpful because there are a lot of presentations online. I would also suggest, if they're policy oriented, to read comments submitted to the public utility commissions.
Okay.
Because those comments tend to be very, how should I put it, simple enough that anybody can understand. Because most commissioners at the public utility commissions do not come from electrical engineering background. They come from a law background or some other course of life. So they tend to receive these comments in a very simple manner. So reading comments in the filed in the public utility commissions or even at FERC, Federal Energy Commission, will be helpful to understand the subject area on storage, specifically on the policy stuff.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's a lot that can be said about PUC right now too, but we won't get into that because that's I was getting heated with that with Griffin the other day. So okay, so looking forward, we'll touch upon this quick and then we'll make sure to get you out of here on time. But essentially, you are very well educated on a variety of policy and electrical engineering concepts. what roadblocks do you see us running into other than, and you can reiterate some of the things we discussed a little bit earlier too, that are going to prevent us from getting to this like 100% renewable goal as a country and as a world?
Right. So that 100% or 100% renewable goal, some people just don't like renewables.
Yeah.
That's the first road barrier. To talk to them knowledgeably and nicely about what renewables can bring and all that kind of stuff is very important. But at the same time, the notion that renewables cause blackouts, renewables cause people to lose their lives is wrong. I see that happening in this industry by some politicians, legislators. I also see that happening from organizations who don't want, for example, renewables to grow, even though they're benefiting from renewables. I mean, look at the state that is benefiting the most from renewables, Georgia.
Yeah.
Does it have any renewable energy policy that is making waves like California? I don't think so. But there are a lot of battery manufacturers locating to Georgia from an economic development point of view. So what I'm trying to say here is you need to really understand what is the other side saying, and especially on reliability, because the current notion that renewables cause blackouts is coming from these attribute like dispatchability, right? When a control room operator in MISO dispatches a generator, he expects that to perform. Mm-hmm. That is true for a natural gas generator as well, that they won't perform or they are underperforming. Winter Storm Elliott is a classic example.
It can happen to anything.
It can happen to anything. So my point is, understand the basics of this. And in fact, one of the things that I ran into in California, for example, and one of the projects is they said storage is not going to be coming online pretty soon because of all these problems, because it cannot get delivery of energy. The thing that they were concerned about is a battery fire accident. One battery fire that happened in California is what they were concerned about. But that simple incident, they blowed it up and made as if batteries are not dependable. Yeah. Batteries are delivering energy all the time right now. In California, in New York, in Texas, all these states.
So I guess my biggest concern with batteries, at least when I was looking at the tech 4 years ago for home batteries, is they had like a shelf life of about 10 years.
Right.
Is that true still with like utility scale batteries of about a 10-year lifespan?
So those changes are coming.
Okay.
So it's not any more 10-year warranty or a 10,000 cycles. It is 20,000 cycles.
Okay.
And more, depends on the battery technology. Is it going to be a lithium ion battery, or is it going to be a nickel manganese battery, cobalt battery, so on and so forth. But also we should realize that the battery cycle is dependent upon how many times you use the battery during the day. Are you using it only once? Well, during the day?
Yeah, most utilities are using it as demand or peak shaving, right?
Right.
So if you're only just charging once a day,
then it will have a longer life.
Gotcha. Okay.
But if you're using multiple times, then it will have a shorter life.
Yeah, that makes sense.
However, battery manufacturers also, if you are willing to pay a little bit extra, like Best Buy service program, they can do a battery augmentation plan, meaning they will replace the batteries that are fault by new ones as part of this plan. So you don't have to change the entire system. This is just like building blocks of Legos.
Yeah.
You can have multiples of them.
Interesting. I didn't know that you could do that on big, large scale. I know that like certain batteries like Enphase are stackable, right?
And most batteries are stackable.
Yeah.
Most batteries are stackable.
Interesting. Okay. On a similar note, sleeping dragons, things that you see just from your expertise that are going to become a big deal, but then aren't currently in the public hot topic area.
I'll have another acronym for you then.
Okay, give it to me.
So it's called Grid Enhancing Technologies.
Okay.
GETS, GET, Grid Enhancing Technologies. So these are technologies, these are basically sensors that you can tag on a transmission tower or a line. You might have heard of this magic ball that GRE had in the press recently from a Norwegian company. You should get out more.
I know. We're really stuck with the studio.
No. So grid enhancing technologies are these sensors on transmission lines.
Okay.
And they can enable more renewables on existing lines without the need for new. We might still need new, but to use more of the existing system, these grid enhancing technologies can enable, like sensors basically. So they provide real-time information on wind, temperature, solar and stuff. As a result, the line is no longer has something called a static rating. It has a dynamic rating. That enables more renewables to be online. And I'm really interested in seeing that growth in this industry, because suddenly this static or this transmission line that no one ever thinks about is going to come live for us, if you will.
So basically it's a ball you put around a transmission line, similar to like what you would see near airports to see transmission lines, and it turns a static line that gives you no data into something that provides you multiple points of data, such as wind, temperature.
So the concept here is, if the line is not hot on a peak summer day, which restricts the flow on the line, because otherwise it risks the line to be burnt. You have, if it is a spring season or if it is a windy and it is cold, then you get more throughput on the line than you were assuming.
How does it, what is, okay, this might be too technical, but what's actually the tech inside of it?
Power
Is it just a bunch
electronics.
of wrapped coils?
Power electronics.
Yeah.
Power electronics that hook onto the conductor and find out what is the conductor going through. And once it's hooked on, the conductor temperature is what matters, right? Before burning the line down. It is making sure the voltage, current, and everything is given in real time. It is providing that real-time information. Just like generators have, this is providing for the transmission lines now.
Okay. So not necessarily a sleeping dragon, but a huge opportunity in the marketplace.
It is. Okay, maybe your sleeping dragon is...
Sleeping dragon would be potential big roadblocks where it's like, hey, everybody's super excited about batteries, but nobody knows that lithium mining is going to be extremely expensive and difficult. That would be a sleeping dragon. So I'm not saying that's a great example because I don't know too much about the economics of lithium mining, but I'm saying that would be something. Or another one would be squirrels underneath solar panels. People never think about that, and then it's like, oh, you get panels, and then everyone wants squirrel guard. So that would be a sleeping dragon. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Now, maybe this example, let me know if this hits a mark or not. Bitcoin mining.
Yeah.
Bitcoin mining, most environmentalists don't like it because they're using a lot of fossil energy, they say. Or they're using a lot of renewable energy. But in my view, Bitcoin mining is essential for the grid because it is going to be the only resource that is flexible. Bitcoin mining resources, like basically, if you think about it, they're demand response resources, meaning they can fluctuate their demand. How many of us can fluctuate our demand from 0 to 100, 100 to 0 in a less than a second? Not many of us, but Bitcoin mining can. And there is value in that. When you ask the question about 100% renewables, one of the reasons why I think 100% renewables is achievable is because there are entities like Bitcoin mining who can reduce their demand as needed, but we cannot. So they need to get paid for the flexibility. As a result, now we have flexible resources who get paid for reducing the demand if needed. And now we have a system where if there is excess energy, it gets absorbed into the battery. If there is less energy from solar, then the demand can be reduced. Voila, you can balance the grid. It's as simple as that.
Well, I think on that's a pretty solid note to end. Thank you very much, Rao, for swinging in, and look forward to seeing you. Well, I won't be there, but Lizzie will be there May 30th at MINCIA's next event. So
absolutely.
All right.
Thank you. Take care.